So, hello and welcome to the first webinar in Kent Law School's Summer of Law series. Today's webinar is Law in Action. So first of all, we'd like to introduce ourselves. My name is Vivien Gambling. I'm one of the Clinic Solicitors and a senior lecturer in the law school. And Philippa?
Yeah, hi, I am Philippa Bruce. I am also one of the Clinic Solicitors and a senior lecturer in the law school.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name's Hannah, and I'm a welfare benefits solicitor within the law clinic here at Kent.
So today, as you know, the webinar is Law in Action. And what we're hoping to do today is to give you an illustration of the type of work that we do in the law clinic and to get you involved in applying the law to particular real life cases that we're going to be discussing. So first of all, I'll say a little bit about the law clinic.
Just before you do, would it be helpful if I opened the PowerPoint, Viv?
Yes, I was going to say.
We'll get that open.
We have some slides that will tell you a little bit. So I can start explaining about the law clinic. We all work in the law clinic, and Kent Law Clinic is part of the law school. It's run by members of the academic staff who are qualified lawyers, and we work on real life cases to help members of the public with their legal problems. And what's that got to do with law students? Well, it's everything to do with law students, because students work hand in hand together with the law practitioners, ourselves and our colleagues, to work on cases for members of the public and to do real live work. And the areas of work that we focus on are the kinds of cases, I mean, a very broad range of cases, and the kind of cases that touch on people's everyday lives. So, for example, I deal mainly with housing cases, and my colleague Philippa deals with family cases. Hannah specialises in welfare benefit cases. And we also have colleagues who deal with immigration issues and what have I missed out? Employment law.
Employment.
Yeah. So I've really told you what's on that slide, and there we have a wonderful picture of most of our colleagues who work in the law clinic, and that was at the beginning of last year when we had an open day for law students at the beginning of term, an open day to come and find out more and how students can get involved. So, as I say, we want to give you an illustration and get you actively involved. So we're going to deal with two case scenarios today, and we want you to use the chat function and to answer a couple of questions that we'll all discuss together about these cases. So I'd now like to hand over to Philippa to...
Thank you. Thanks for introducing things, Viv. I will say, while Viv's been talking to you about that, I've been trying to make the PowerPoint work, but no matter how many times I press the relevant buttons, it doesn't want to move and be very helpful today. So it's very laggy, unfortunately. So we're just going to work around it, because do you know what? This is what real life looks like, isn't it? And we just have to make do. So what we want to do today is to take you through some very kind of typical inquiries that come into the clinic. And as Viv mentioned, I'm going to start you off with the first one. Hey, the PowerPoint is showing. So can I just check that everyone can see? Thumbs up, good stuff. For all of you that are in the chat, what we're going to do is really use the polls that we have the option of using on Zoom to get you started, and then we'll open it up so that we can see when we ask you some more specific questions what your thoughts are through the chat function. So if you can just hold off with the chat for a second, that would be really helpful, because as you can see, it's going to show up on the middle of my screen and you're not going to want to see that at the moment. So we'll come to that. I'll intermittently stop sharing and reshare. But this is an inquiry. So everything that we do in the clinic starts with a member of the public contacting us with a new inquiry. And I'm going to read it out for you. So the client is from Afghanistan and he has worked in the UK for 10 years. In August of 2021, so about 3 years ago now, during the Taliban invasion, his wife and his 7 children were evacuated from Afghanistan by the British Army and brought to the UK. At the same time, his nephews, who are 6 and 8, were also evacuated. Their parents, unfortunately, couldn't get out of Afghanistan, and the client has been caring for the 2 boys ever since, with the parents' consent. Now, one of the nephews now needs an operation, and the hospital need what we would call consent from a parent or a carer. And the client has tried to give that consent, but he's been told he doesn't have the legal right to do so. The hospital tried to contact the parents in Afghanistan and arrange like a meeting with them so that they could consent. But unfortunately, the internet where the parents are currently located was very unstable. And when they tried to have the meeting, it didn't work. So the operation was cancelled. The client therefore wants some legal advice on what he can do. And he's also explained that he's experienced other issues with the boys' schools, trying to arrange which school they go to, and issues with the local dentist, where they're asking if he's got the right to make decisions on their behalf. And so he has come to us asking for legal advice about what he should do. Okay, so hopefully you've all now got an idea of what the problem is for this family. I'll stop sharing my screen for a second, because what we'd like to do is to open up a poll. So if I can ask one of my wonderful colleagues to pop us a poll up for the first inquiry, that would be great. And what we want to think about, and what we always think about in the clinic, is what's going on here. You know, we've got a jumbled set of information from a client, and we have to start processing that to see if we can understand what the client's problem is. And so we sometimes have to ask ourselves, well, you know, what area of law might this be? So we'll just wait a second while the poll appears. I know you'll be itching your fingers getting ready to go.
So perhaps while we're waiting, we could just go over the facts. There's quite a lot of information to take in.
Sure.
So yeah, client is from Afghanistan, and his wife and 7 children were evacuated and brought to the UK, and the client's nephews also evacuated, and our client has been caring for them. Yes, am I right?
You are right. Sorry,
Yeah.
we're trying to see the poll and we can't yet see the poll. So we're very helpfully, everyone's just confirming that they also can't see the poll.
Okay.
So
okay.
we'd just be patient.
All right.
That's interesting, because I can see that some people have voted on it.
Oh, really?
So if everyone clicks at the bottom of their screen, there might be a polls and quizzes option.
That's correct, because we have 13 votes already. So is it possible, everyone, to check the screen?
Click the poll and quizzes button.
Thank
Super.
you.
Thank you. Look at this. This is why we do everything as a group effort in the clinic, because it takes at least 5 minds to get to the bottom of a legal inquiry. Okay, great. So what you can see, for those of you now seeing it, is we've asked you simply what areas of law might be relevant to this inquiry. Now, this is one of those questions where you can select as many answers as you want. And the suggestions that we've given you is immigration, human rights, family, criminal, and housing. And I just want to see kind of what we think might be some relevant factors. Okay, so I'll just give that another little moment, because I don't yet think that everyone has quite had a chance to vote. But the results I can see so far are quite interesting. Now, can everyone else see the results? As it's coming through, it tells you that so far we've got 60% of people saying that it's likely to involve immigration, 65% saying human rights, 60% saying it may concern family, 30% criminal, and 10% housing. Okay, so where that leads us is to start to think, well, why? Why have we all maybe got those different interpretations? Why are we all thinking it might be different factors? So quite a number of you have started out with identifying immigration. And maybe we could kind of look at that one first. So in the chat, you can now add why do you think it might have immigration law relevant to this one? Let's see what some people are thinking on that one. So now you can add that little bit of depth to your chat answer.
So this illustrates that lots of the cases that we deal with in the clinic cover more than one area of law, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's often the case with the real life cases that come to us.
Yes, and I think one thing that I have very much learned since teaching in the clinic and working in the clinic is that things don't always fit neatly into boxes. And when we are in the law school studying our topics, we often, we'll start you out by thinking about criminal law and about contract law, and it's all very divided into different areas. But then you come into the clinic and you find that all of these things are actually working together. And so we start to see that a number of these things might be relevant. Okay, so I can see in the chat that people have started to give some answers to why this might be immigration law, and someone has said due to their transition from a foreign country through evacuation. Great. So there might be issues about, they've had to evacuate from Afghanistan. They've now come to the UK. Are they legally allowed to remain here? Our client, we learned from the facts, was already here. He'd been here for 10 years. Okay, good. So let's think about a human rights element. Why do we think this case might have a human rights element? What kind of issues do you think might be brought up by that? So I'll give you a moment to answer in the chat. And, human rights is something that many of you might be interested in studying. I know it's something that's often very popular as an area that people want to learn an awful lot more about. And it's certainly something that cuts right across your kind of law degree and your studies into a number of different types of problem. So Jordan's given a great short answer there that just says it's because human rights involve basic human rights to have access to healthcare. So this boy certainly deserves to be able to have access to the operation. Yes.
And Philippa, we've also got a contribution from someone who's suggesting that it concerns an individual who's presented from seeing their family, and that's quite a common case situation that you're presented with as a family solicitor, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. So family is a very popular area where people contact the clinic for legal advice. I'd say, over 50% of the inquiries we get will touch upon family law. And when you kind of come and work in the clinic, I might rant at you quite a lot about why that might be, and we can learn about that in much more depth. But it's certainly something that comes up very frequently, and it's a really important issue that impacts upon people's lives, you know, their ability to continue to have relationships with their family members.
And that very often overlaps with immigration law, doesn't it? The right to join other members of the family in a different country. So there's a strong overlap there.
That's right. Now, interestingly, in the poll, the strongest answer is that this is about family law. Okay, and I'm glad that we've identified that, because I would agree with that. Although there are elements of some of the other issues, it is most definitely one that we would start out by thinking about some family law, because here we have someone who's looking after a child, but they don't have the legal status in that child's life to be able to make decisions. And so that would broadly fall under the family law heading. Okay. Now, the wonderful thing about getting involved in the law clinic is that we don't expect you to know that. We don't have any expectation that the students that come and spend time with us have loads of prior knowledge. Our fundamental belief is that we can look at some facts, some things that a person tells us about a case, and then we can use our common sense to start to try and unpick it. And then we have great resources available to us through the university to then find out what the law might be and what might be relevant to our case. So just to finish this off, we can see that a few of you thought that there might be a criminal law element to this one. And I'd be interested, for those of you that thought that, maybe you could put your comments in the chat as to perhaps what that might be, so that we could have a look. And a couple of you also mentioned housing. Now, Hannah, do you remember what I was explaining to you before about this one? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so this client obviously has a rather large family living with him, and because of their status, they were looking for assistance from the local authority to find accommodation for them all. But with such a large family, I mean, we're talking about 11 people. The man who's been working here for 10 years, his wife, and 7 children. Does that 7 children include the 2 nephews, Philippa? No, okay. Oh, sorry, my maths is wrong. We're looking at 13 people all trying to find accommodation together. So the local authority doesn't often have a house that's that big. So they were put into what's called temporary accommodation here. Slightly outside of town, because in town it's a bit difficult again to find accommodation that's that large. But they were given 4 rooms in a hotel, and I cannot imagine the logistics of working out which of the elder children were with the younger children, and how did you say they ranged from 17 down to 0 years old? Because they had another child in 2021, so quite a setup they had going on there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased that somebody identified the potential housing issue, because that's my passion, and yeah, very interesting. As Hannah says, difficulty of housing, but it's not just the size of the family; it's the shortage of housing generally.
Absolutely.
But that's for another day.
It is for another day. But again, just to give you an insight of what we end up doing in the clinic, we would end up talking about that. So we have large group meetings with anybody who is interested in being involved in the clinic every week. And these are the kind of issues that we get into debating with our students. And we spend an hour all in the clinic just sitting and talking about why there might be a shortage of housing in the UK at the moment, and why these kind of issues become quite complicated. So it's a really good example of the number of different aspects that we can draw upon from every inquiry that comes in. So what has become apparent from this conversation is that this is a real case. This is a case that I worked on last year. And so I want to ask you another question now, which is to try and guess what the client might have needed to apply for in order to sort out this problem. of not having any kind of legal rights over the children. So we want to now have a go at our second poll. And so I'm just going to give that a second to hope that my lovely colleagues can make that work. And if we now click on the poll, hooray, I can see the second poll, which says, what should our client apply for? And you've got a choice: an adoption order, parental responsibility, or something called special guardianship. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there. All have a go.
I think this was one of the things that struck me when I became a law student, is all these big words that I'd never heard about before, and you kind of use them interchangeably when you're younger, or a person who doesn't know why they were written into the law. So, you know, so my parent was my guardian, weren't they? Are they the same thing?
Yes, absolutely. You're seeing these words and they seem quite similar, yet legally they mean different things. So I can see a number of you have voted, and can we all see the results? I hope so. We've got 5% saying adoption, 14% saying parental responsibility, and 82%, a clear winner there, saying something called special guardianship. Okay, so here's the question. What do all these things mean? So using the chat, give me your ideas. What do you think adoption means? Have a go. Just to keep the ball rolling, we might also ask you, what does parental responsibility mean? And what is special guardianship? So if you think you've heard one of those terms before and you've got a vague idea what you think it might be, have a go, pop it in the chat, because we'd be interested to see what your thoughts are. We have to wait.
Well, they're not easy questions, and it'd be great if we get an answer on one of each of them, on each of them.
Yeah. While we're waiting to see if people are feeling brave today, and it's okay if you're not, because do you know what? This is kind of a hard question, and it's a bit of a cheeky one by me, because there is no expectation that you would know these terms. So in coming to the clinic, and maybe you were sitting with me talking about this problem, sometimes we just have a guess and we see how far common sense can take us in understanding an answer, and then we can think about, well, what should we do to actually find out what the case might be?
So we've had one contribution that I'm not sure everyone can see, but it includes a phrase about taking absolute responsibility for a child, and that's what adoption means.
Okay.
So there's a word in there, responsibility, that's in one of the other options.
That's right. So yes, now I'll give you an answer to, I can see someone else has just added, adoption would be legally taking a child as your own. That's a really good way of summarising it, because what adoption does is it transfers all the legal rights from the original birth family to the person that's adopting that child. Now, we know that in this case, the uncle of these two children is still on good terms with his brother and his wife, and we're not necessarily looking to completely erase the birth family. We just want our client, the uncle, to be able to have some more kind of legal status. So adoption might be a bit too severe for our situation, and also quite legally complex to achieve. So have we got any other ideas what some of those other terms might mean?
We've got one on special guardianship, is providing for a child in the absence of their parents.
Super.
And we also got parental responsibility means having the authority to sign documents on behalf of the parents of the children.
Really good ideas. Okay, so we're zooming in on the kind of elements of what this might mean. Parental responsibility is something to do with being able to make decisions on behalf of a child. Okay, so that feels quite good. But most of you didn't go for this. Most of you went for this thing called special guardianship. Okay, And have we had any answers telling us what special guardianship might be?
Providing for a child in the absence of their parents.
Lovely.
And another answer, the legal right to act as a child's parents.
Great. Okay. So, we've got some people who've clearly got some knowledge out there. So what's interesting is that special guardianship and this idea of parental responsibility are very closely related. Now, this is the real answer. Actually, what we did in this case was none of those three. Okay. You're like, Philippa, how could you be so mean? Well, the reason is that the special guardianship idea is what it was suggested to me that we should do by the charity that referred the client to me. And the charity believed that they asked me if I could help the client get a parental responsibility, get a special guardianship order. And my answer was, well, we could do that, but it's quite complicated and there's a lengthy process that is quite drawn out. But actually, there's an easier route. And so what I did was to give the client some advice on how to get parental responsibility, but through an alternative type of order under the Children Act, which is called a child arrangement order. Now, you don't need to know all of that when you come to work with me in the clinic, but what you'll start to do is to find out how we might discover what the best way of, kind of answering this client's problem is, and exploring these different legal options and working out the pros and cons of each. And things like time, given that we had a child who needs a medical procedure, was very, very relevant. And so that helped us to make a decision as to which path to take. I'm very conscious of not taking up all the time with my inquiry, but I've got one more little poll that I want to do really quickly. So I'm going to close this one and take the next one. And super quickly, I just want you to think, what other issues do you think we had to think about when dealing with this case? Do you think we had issues of client confidentiality, language barriers, safety of parties? That feels a little bit an unusual one. And conflict of interest. You should all be able to see that. You can vote for as many ones as you think might be relevant to this case. And I just want to see what we all make of that.
There's some quite serious terms being brought up in this poll for us solicitors to be thinking about when we're taking on clients in any setting. I'm quite fortunate as a benefits solicitor that my opponent is often the DWP, the government department, so they don't often ask. They've never asked me for advice, to be honest. Actually, so I rarely have a conflict to think about.
Conflict of interest. Okay, I can see lots of answers coming through, and all of these things are being ticked. We've got 41% on confidentiality issues, 61% thinking about language, 95% thinking about safety of the parties, 40% thinking about conflict of interest. Well, interestingly on this one, all of these things are relevant factors that we had to take into account. And as Hannah said, some of them come into account on every case, and then others will be unique. So issues of client confidentiality and what we call conflicts of interest, where we have to make sure that one party hasn't received some advice from us previously, which happens a lot in family law. These are common issues that we deal with regularly in the clinic. And so by coming and being exposed to our clinic work, you will become aware of and familiar with how to deal with these kind of important sort of codes of conduct that we have to follow and kind of ethical issues. The language barrier I put there because, as we mentioned, my client was from Afghanistan, and his English was good, but probably not perfect to the point where I could be, always confident about giving legal advice. Think about all these terms, think about hearing those in your first language or maybe hearing them in your third language. Does the meaning get confused? So I had to be very careful about language issues. And the safety of the parties one I threw in there because this was really interesting. And what made this case particularly unique, the parents who were still in Afghanistan, living in a country that was now under Taliban control, we had serious issues in how we communicated with them. We couldn't send them letters the court couldn't serve them documents as they would normally be required to do, because we didn't want to highlight that this family were working with someone overseas from a kind of westernized country, because that could put them into the sort of lay a target on them from the Taliban's perspective to ask what on earth's going on. And so that was something that even when we went to court, we had to discuss why we couldn't actually bring the parents into the proceedings. Okay, so I hope that that we've enjoyed looking at that one. We're now going to look at something completely different. So who's taking over, Viv or Hannah?
Well, I will invite Hannah to take over to deal with a case which is very different. But before we talk about the specific case, Hannah wants to say something about the area of law which Hannah specialises in.
Thanks, Viv and Philippa. So we're going to move on to thinking about disability benefits and how they've been developed within the UK, and then how they've affected a client in particular that Viv worked with in the last couple of years. So one of the functions of government is to provide for the people that live within the country, and in their true wisdom, and this is not sarcasm, the UK decided that they wanted to make financial provision for people who had long-term health conditions or disabilities that affected their life. So they introduced a benefit called Personal Independence Payment, which we will refer to as PIP from now on, so PIP. And so if you break your arm, that's a short-term thing. You're likely to recover within a couple of weeks. So we're really thinking about health conditions that last for about a year or longer. So that could be a more permanent disability that affects your ability to walk around, or it could be a mental health condition that affects your ability to do particular tasks. So I wanted to start by asking people, what kind of activities do you do every day that you probably take for granted, but actually if you had a health condition that affected your ability to do things, would you expect people to try and help you to do? You know, back before governments existed, it might have been a family member that helped you out with these things, or it might be your neighbour. What are the kind of everyday activities that you think the government might be looking at if they've decided they want to help people who have health conditions? If you could pop them in the chat, and you can think as basic as you like. It might have been something you've done in the last hour. So thanks very much to Ryan, who said opening doors, walking up the stairs. These are all, yeah, the ability to walk.
Good.
Thank you. Eating, crucial. I do it several times a day.
She really does.
Yeah. Mobility issues, again, yeah. So having limited capacity to move or get out of the house. That's a really interesting phrase you use there, getting out of the house. So you've expanded, Holly, thank you. Also mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. And then we've got transportation. There's stigmas of really interesting contribution here, because those are ideas that we definitely have to think about as lawyers when we're asking people questions about their daily life, because I think it's been recognised that people who have health conditions or disabilities have coping mechanisms, often don't want to be labelled as disabled or unable to do things, and you have to get through the day. So we have to be really careful with people working with people with health conditions and disabilities. Think about, how do we ask people about these things and get the information that we need to be able to support them. We've got another contribution, housework. What kind of activities are we thinking about when we think of housework? There's also meal preparation, and we had eating earlier, which is something I like doing. Meal prep, I'm not so keen on, but two different activities, and they're both right. They're both recorded separately by the government and assessed. Pip?
I think personal care, two people have mentioned, and of course that's something which is a delicate issue that we might have to ask people about, quite kind of personal questions, which can be, yeah, it needs sensitivity, doesn't it, asking around those issues.
Definitely. Should we look at the inquiry? Would you like me to load up?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So we're going to talk about, as Hannah said, a case that I've helped a client with in the last couple of years. These cases do take some time sometimes. So while we're waiting, hopefully for the slide to come up.
Can you see it? I have loaded it.
I can't see that particular slide. I can just see the cover sheet at the
I
moment.
see the first slide, Philippa.
Oh, it's
Okay.
Russian roulette, isn't it? Let's press
Okay.
the button. Does it move on?
What
Not
I'll
yet.
do is I'll start reading the facts of this case while we're
Trying
waiting.
again.
While we're trying, yeah, in case it doesn't come up. So here goes. My client Sonia, here we go. I can see it now. Sonia, not her real name, is 30 years old. And when she was 12 years old, she was hit by a car when crossing a road at a zebra crossing, I might add. She suffered serious injuries, including a brain injury, a broken leg, and she lost her taste and smell. She gets very anxious now, and she gets extremely tired as well. She suffers from chronic fatigue. She finds it difficult to concentrate, and she tends to forget things. However, she's a really strong character, and she wants to be as independent as she can be. Her mother, she relies a lot on her mother for support. And on average, she might phone her mother 3 times a day. That's quite unusual for somebody who's an adult of 30 years old. Sonia has a job. She's employed for 12 hours a week at a care home, and the employer is very supportive. And although the work takes Sonia a lot longer than 12 hours, she only gets paid for 12 hours, but the employer recognises the importance of allowing her to work because it helps her, gets self-esteem and is good for her. So on days that Sonia works, however, she's too tired to cook. Even on the next day, she'll often need encouragement before she will cook a meal for herself. Also, when she's cooking, it's not unusual for her to phone her mother with questions. For example, her mother says, she phones me saying, what ingredients do I use? How long do I need to boil the vegetables, etc. And there have been times when Sonia's let food burn on the hob when she forgets that it was baking in the oven, or left something boiling on the hob. So it's quite a there are various things that she struggles with, but we thought that, yeah, we would concentrate on one aspect in particular. But first of all, for our first question, perhaps we can bring that up, a poll question, which is, we've heard that Sonia works, she has a job in the care home. So do you think the fact that Sonia is employed, i.e. she has a job, prevents her being entitled to claim the disability benefit, which is PIP?
Okay, we'll just wait for that one to load, shall we?
So yeah, clearly for some people who have a disability, they may be completely unable to work at all.
Hopefully you can all see that now.
And can I suggest that if people are going to answer it depends, they might pop in the chat what they think it depends on.
Right, so yep, answers still coming in. So far, Most of the answers suggest that no, having a job does not prevent Sonia from being able to claim PIP, personal injury independence payment. And one answer says yes, it does. I mean, you're not expected to know the correct answer to this, but it's interesting, as Hannah said. If you say it depends, what does it depend on? So the question is whether the fact that she's employed prevents her being entitled to PIP. So
I think we've got a message to us that says it really shouldn't stop her. It should all depend on her ability to cope with the daily living and mobility. And there's phrases being used here that sounds like this person is familiar with PIP. We've got another suggestion that it depends on her pay.
Right. Okay. So Hannah, would you like to comment on those two answers? So
well, the government's position is that if you have a health condition or a disability that affects your ability and you meet the other qualifying criteria, as has been suggested, your daily life and your mobility is affected so much that actually they don't mind how much money you have or how much you earn or how big your mansion is. It costs you to have this health condition, and therefore they will pay the disability benefits. So very few benefits in this country are not means tested. That's a phrase we use to describe benefits where the government don't look at how much money you have or what your income is. But disability benefits are kind of in that very small category where we recognise that your health conditions are not your fault, and therefore if you have kind of an additional cost because of those health conditions or disabilities, then the government will support you with the money that they pay for PIP, regardless of what your other means are. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the richest person in the country with a health condition is going to apply for PIP and ask for the money, but the government don't look into your bank account if they've decided you're entitled.
Super. Right, I'm conscious of time, so shall we look at the next bit?
Yes, please. So we're now wanting to get you all to apply the law to these facts. And we're going to focus, I mean, as I said, Sonia has difficulties with various different tasks, but what we're, in the time available, we're just going to focus and think about what the rules and regulations, what the law is about whether somebody is awarded points, because there's an assessment system based on points. And this is just one element of it. So it's also a bit of a memory test, because we've told you the facts, and it requires you to try to remember what we looked at about Sonia's case. So here we have what are called 6 different descriptors, and the points are awarded according to each of these descriptors describes a level of difficulty. So I'll just quickly read them, and all we're asking you to do is to choose which descriptor you think, which of those descriptions applies best to Sonia. And if you think that more than one applies, then choose the one, as we would do if we're acting for Sonia, which attracts the highest number of points. So there'll be a poll question which will won't replicate the actual test. So I'll just read them out, and as I go through, if you can decide which one you think applies. So
do they need to pick which letter, so they bear in mind which letter?
That's right. Cool. So thank you. So the question will ask you which of those, the letters actually are part of the regulations as they're described. So A, can prepare and cook a simple meal unaided. Does that apply to Sonia? Or B, needs to use an aid or appliance to be able to cook or prepare a simple meal. C, cannot cook a simple meal using a conventional cooker, but is able to do so using a microwave. D, needs prompting to be able to either prepare or cook a simple meal. E, needs supervision or assistance to either prepare or cook a simple meal. Or F, cannot prepare and cook food. So some people are voting already, so we'll just give it a little longer. And answers so far seem to be, wait for it, D and E. Exactly. Yes.
Couple more answers coming through.
If you'd like to, perhaps you could pop in the chat why you think the one you voted for is the right answer.
Yes, so if you voted D, tell us why needing supervision or assistance doesn't apply. If you voted E, why you think supervision does apply. So that's where the, if you like, the turning point is, isn't it? The difference. So E obviously is the one that we would argue for if we're acting for Sonia, if we think that she meets that that criteria, that descriptor. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes.
Seconds, Viv, not minutes.
Seconds, okay. No, I meant seconds.
So D starts with needs prompting and E starts with needs supervision or assistance. And what we've heard is that Sonia says she's too tired to cook. Even on the next day, she'll often need encouragement before she cooks a meal for herself. And she often calls her mum to ask questions about what ingredients and how long to boil vegetables for.
Lovely. We've got such
yes.
a lovely bunch of people here, but you're all so shy because you're all just sending your answers to the hosts and panelists rather than to everyone. So I promise you lots of people are answering.
Right, right. So we've got a lot of supervision and assistance apply. So the majority went for supervision and assistance because she calls her mother during and asks questions. And yep, she lacks concentration. So I mean, does anyone think does it make a difference that she's calling her mother on the telephone? Her mother isn't in the room with her. You might expect supervision to be somebody to be standing over, helping and prompting. So yes or no, does it matter that her mother's not in the same room? And I'm going to invite the expert, Hannah Henderson, to comment on what Hannah Henderson thinks is the right answer. Which would you argue for?
Yeah, I think if this was my client and my aim is to get her the most points, I might even be cheeky and argue for 8. But I think I'd be more likely to get 4 points, and I therefore agree with the majority of the poll that descriptor E, needing supervision or assistance, because she's ringing her mum. That is assistance.
Yes, yeah. So absolutely, she still requires that support. So in a sentence, Hannah, could you explain what the argument is that, I mean, we didn't have enough time to go into the detail of all the regulations, which are quite complex, but in a sentence, why might you argue for not being able to cook or prepare a meal? So cannot prepare and cook food
at all. Well, look, I think that she might have been suggesting that even with the help that she got from her mum, she was burning food. She forgot it when it was being baked in the oven. So even with all of that supervision or assistance, she wasn't actually achieving the task of being able to prepare a food.
Yes.
There are other rules about how often that happens.
Yeah, the rules about safety as well, isn't there? So clearly there's she's forgetful and there have been accidents already. So if you're preparing her case, you would rely on examples that she might give about, well, what happened that day when nearly set the house on fire, etc.
Absolutely.
We've had a question in the chat about what if there's multiple reasons. Well, that's all the better for us, because the more that we can say to support our arguments, the better.
Yes, yeah. So thank you very much for all your really helpful input there. So shall I, Philippa, do you want to say something about what you students getting involved?
I do. I definitely want to do that. I need to get everything else off my screen and make. Can we see student involvement?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're really hoping that you've listened to us talking about these two genuine legal inquiries that have come into the clinic and that we have taken on as cases. And we hope that that's making you think, hey, that seems quite exciting. How do I get involved? So this is just a little snippet of the different ways that will get you involved. First of all, a wonderful collage picture here that one of our colleagues, Meg, made, which show you the kind of spirit of the clinic. We enjoy spending time together. It's one aspect of the law school where the academic staff and the students work very, very closely together and actually spend a lot of time, rather than, you know, that distance being a lecturer behind a lectern and you sitting in your seats sort of 20 meters away. You know, you can see we all kind of hang out together. But we have lots of different ways that you will come and get involved. The main thing is that you've just got to have that desire to come and be part of it. And that's basically our only requirement. There's no test, there's no kind of pre-required knowledge. It's just enthusiasm to turn up. So the chances that we would give you would start out with something like being an office volunteer, where what you would do is look at new inquiries just like the ones we've gone through today, and we would have a tangled mess of facts that a client has given us, and we would sit with you and we'd start to unpick that and say, well, what kind of legal problem do you think that is? So that's something that our first year students come and do with us. The other things that we would offer you to do is that person's then going to need some legal advice so that they can understand what their legal options are. And we have evening advice sessions where we give that legal advice to members of the public for free, and our students attend those sessions and they observe legal advice being given by professionals. So you get to see how it should be done, but you also get to network with some local solicitors and barristers who offer their time for free to support our services. So that's a great opportunity. We have a number of things called action groups. So some of you will develop particular interests in areas of law. You might be like, wow, Hannah and Viv have absolutely sold me on this welfare benefits. You know, what's this all about? Well, Hannah runs an action group and they meet regularly and they look at individual cases, and students work on those cases and think about some of the broader issues that arise. So we all have action groups in specific areas of law. There is something called the Clinic optional module that we all teach on, and that is an assessed module that you can do for academic credit, and that gives you a really amazing opportunity to work on a case with a supervisor, kind of in like a paralegal or a trainee solicitor role. So that's something that many people are interested in. I think I mentioned it earlier, but we have this weekly get together, the hub. Every week we come together and we talk about whatever's going on in the clinic, and students just turn up to that. And we also have quite a thriving social scene, most recently of which involved Hannah and I running bingo, and I've never seen a more enthusiastic bingo caller in my life than Hannah Henderson. She was wild. So many things going on, but really all it requires is you to have that enthusiasm to come and get involved in us. Hannah, do you want to take the next one for me?
Yep. So just to wrap up the session today, we want to give you 3 key takeaways. So if you don't remember what we discussed over the last 56 minutes, 3 points to remember. So the Kent Law Clinic has 2 main aims. The first is to provide quality advice and representation to people in Kent who would otherwise be unable to afford or access legal assistance. And our second goal is to enhance the legal education of our students. As you might have been able to tell from our case discussions today, there are rarely any ready-made answers to people's legal problems. There are often a couple of options, and we have to think which one's going to best suit our client's circumstances. And that might not be the same for the same client who's got the same kind of issue, but their circumstances are very different. So it's not just a matter of looking up what the answer might be in the textbook, but actually what's going to help our client the most. And so there's much more to studying law or to knowing law or to working in law than being aware of the statutes and the judgments and looking at textbooks. The experiences of our clients really help us to teach and to learn about how the law works and doesn't work in everyday life. So that just leaves us to say thank you all so much for joining us for the last hour, and we look forward to meeting you in September. And this is the first session, but there are many more to come, and some of our clinic colleagues and law school colleagues will be talking about an immigration case, I think, next week. So I highly recommend you come back for session 2.
So that's next week, same time, 2 o'clock, isn't it? 2 o'clock on the Thursday.
Indeed.
The 20th.
Perfect. Right, thank you ever so much, everybody. We will leave you there, and please come and seek us out if you decide to join us, because we will be very happy to welcome you into Kent Law Clinic.